Hey there, Bitcoin. It's Tuesdays with Jimmy. And BIP 91 is signaling at 74% with an additional, looks like 17% for Segwit. So Segwit is being activated. BIP 91 lock-in period. We have 319 blocks before the current lock-in period ends. We still need 254 blocks for a lock-in. And as you can see, the last 144 and 1,000 blocks. A lot of blocks are signaling BIP 91. The price of Bitcoin is 2267. Bit of a downturn since a top of around 2393, perhaps. And suddenly it's moving down to 2260. A lot of sell orders going down. We're here to talk about a Gregory Maxwell article about Alice, Bob, Carol, and Dave. But we're really here to talk about Jimmy Song's new article of UASF, Segwit2x, timelines and scenarios. Today is Tuesday, July 18th, 2017. My name is Thomas Hunt, and we're joined by Jimmy Song. How's it going, Jimmy?
It's going great. Yeah, a lot of stuff happening. It's going to be a fun couple of weeks. Let's say that much.
It certainly is, and we've got stuff like Greg Maxwell's article coming out saying that there might be something wrong with trying to go forward with just 80%. It sounds like if you go forward with 80%, some of the miners might get left behind and they might get stuck on their own chain, and then there'd be multiple chains. But do you want to try to explain this in more detail? And before we go into this, I think Tone had a lot of warnings when he talked about this today, and I want to have a lot of warnings on ours. No one should panic about this. We think this is kind of a minor esoteric issue. This is something where you're game theorying things and you're dartboarding things and you're like, that's a possibility. That's something that could happen. It's not something that's likely to happen, but it's something that could happen. So let's try to understand the troubles of Alice, Bob, Carol, and Dave. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is, I would consider this sort of a low probability scenario, but I mean, Greg's absolutely right in bringing this issue up because it may happen. Basically, you have Alice, Bob, Carol, and Dave, and they're BTC1 miners. So they're sort of not connected to each other, but connected to the network, and they can't sort of hear each other because the middle of the network isn't running BTC1 and isn't rejecting sort of non-segwit signaling blocks. And in that case, what would happen is they wouldn't hear about new blocks and they wouldn't be connected to each other. So they would constantly be they would be stuck at a particular height trying to find blocks on their own. And his concern is that if this were to happen, then BTC1 would just fail, BIP 91 would just fail to enforce the Segwit having to signal for a Segwit rule that would be on the network as a result of BIP 91. Now, note that this would only happen if after BIP 91 activation, the first block found is by a non-BIP 141 signaling block, and that's why he calls it a unlimited running miner. I have a strong suspicion that wouldn't be the case, but it is possible. Just because from a game theory perspective, after BIP 91 activates, you are risking a lot by mining without signaling for Segwit. But he is pointing out there is a possibility that A, B, and C and D will never hear about each other's blocks, and therefore the BIP 91 enforcing nodes won't be able to overtake the unlimited running or this block basically. It's kind of a low probability event. There are many ways to fix it. The most obvious is just to have A, B, C, and D connect to each other. So what he's suggesting towards the end is, could you go back to the other screen there? Yeah, what he suggests towards the end, if you scroll down a little bit, resolution is to either guarantee that there are none before enforcing or manually guarantee that the graph of enforcing miners is connected. And that last part is the more obvious one, which is, hey, A, B, C, and D, instead of not connecting to each other, just make sure you're connected to each other so you hear each other's blocks, and that will obviously, because BIP91 is a soft fork, that would overtake the non-signaling block. I would say this is a relatively low probability event, but I mean, it is obviously a valid concern, so that's been brought up. You shouldn't panic about this. This would only happen if basically somebody that's not signaling for BIP91 now, or and not signaling for BIP141 now, which is something like 4 or 5% of miners. One of them decides after BIP91 activation to continue mining without signaling for Segwit and manages to find the first block. I mean, I would consider that a fairly low probability event just from a game theory perspective. So that's my sort of analysis of it.
That does sound like an incredibly low probability. They'd have to win the lottery, and they'd have to be mining against their own interest. So if you're willing to mine against your own interest and you win the lottery, then we have trouble. But this does show you the kind of level to which the core developers go, the kind of things that they think about. When I went to their meetup recently, or the developers meetup, they talked about if you were giving someone a Bitcoin address over the phone and you would transpose some of the letters or numbers, they wanted a system to try to figure that out. And they had built an incredible graph of numbers and what the most likely Z's look like 2s and other things of how many steps away each thing was. And it was incredible, but it was to solve the problem of reading an address over the phone, which probably never happens, but happens.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing that Greg Maxwell is very, very good at, and he's a world-class developer for a reason, right? Like he can spot things like this and figure out, okay, well, this is like a 2% probability event or something like that. But he gets concerned about 2% probability events because that's what good developers do. They figure out the low probability events, make sure that they're defending against it, and that's essentially what he's done here.
All right, so I think we've solved that one, and we've got around 144 viewers. So if everyone could give us a thumbs up and a share, that helps more people find the show. And let's move on to the meat of what we're talking about today, because Jimmy and I have been predicting this, and we've been talking about this, and now it seems like it's happening. The New York agreement, which said that they would signal for Segwit2x, a combination of Segwit and then later a 2x hard fork, seems to be activating on the network. So what's been happening so far, Jimmy?
Well, so it's interesting because basically what's happening is that Segwit2x seems to have released early, and according to some people, it's code complete, so people can run it now, and miners seem to be running it. Now, that's not to say they actually are running the Segwit2x BTC1 code. What they could be doing is sort of signaling using get block template and just running core. They could also be running James Hilliard's BIP91 only fork, which he released, or they could actually be running BTC1. We don't know. There's no way to tell just by examining the blocks. But there are a lot of miners signaling this. And they started signaling, I think, the day before yesterday. But the way BIP91 works is that it divides every difficulty adjustment period, 2016 blocks, into 6 equal 336 block intervals. And what you have to do is get over 80% in a particular 336 block interval. I called them epochs in my article there. The newest epoch started about 2.5 hours ago, or 3 hours ago, actually. And that was block, let's see, what number was it? 476448. And that started the new epoch, and that's what we're seeing here is there's 319 blocks to go. So there's already been 17 blocks, and out of those 17, something like 14 or 14 out of 17 or 15 out of 18 blocks have signaled for BIP91. So it looks like it's on track. Of course, that's a small sample size, and we don't know what's going to happen. I will note that Bitfury doesn't seem to be signaling for BIP91, whereas they were before. So that's a little bit strange, but yeah, we'll see. And if this epoch gets 80%, then we lock in BIP91, and then one epoch after that is when enforcement of BIP91 starts, which basically says, hey, you need to signal BIP141 or else we will orphan you. And with at least 80% of all miners doing that, you're taking a tremendous risk if you're not signaling for Segwit. So that, from a game theory perspective, means that most people will be signaling for Segwit. And that's sort of summarized in my optimistic timeline in the article I published this morning, except everything's sort of happening about 3 hours earlier. And that's basically due to more mining hash power being online. I was hearing earlier that it's about 8.5 minutes to find the block instead of the normal 10. It's not a surprise since mining is so profitable, and all hash power that can come online probably has. And there's new mining equipment being manufactured every day, and that's probably contributing to the fast block times. Yeah, so yeah, the epoch has begun. We can expect it to close on, let's see, today's Tuesday, sometime around Friday, like 5 p.m. GMT, something. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it would be today. Yeah, today is Tuesday. It would be Friday around 7 a.m. GMT. So that would be like midnight Thursday or something around there. So, at least in my time. You figure it out for your own time zone. But yeah, that would be when that would happen. Everyone's going to be watching closely. I imagine the market may react in some way or the other if this epoch closes with BIP91 actually locking in. So yeah, well, it's exciting times, and for the most part, it looks like the New York agreement is holding.
All right, so the New York agreement is holding. We can't tell what kind of code they're running yet. We can't tell if they're running BIP91, if they're running the BIP91 only fork, or if they're running BTC1 and it's running through BIP91, right?
Yeah, or they could be running core and sort of patching core with a change in the get block template. I believe that's an option, at least according to Adam Back. So you could be running core and still signal. And actually, there's a clever way you can figure that out. If you go to CoinDance or something like that and look at the version number, anyone signaling one like 0x200000010, which Antpool seems to be doing, which is signaling just BIP91 and not also BIP141. That I suspect is probably not BTC1 or and may just be BIP91 only, or a patched core client or something like that, because at least the way that BTC1 works is by default you signal both BIP91 and BIP141, so it would end in 1-2, which BTCC is signaling, which Bixen is signaling, BitClub is signaling those, so they may be running it. But BTC.com, BTC.top, and Pool, I suspect that maybe they're not running it. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, the next couple of days will get us more and more data, and this is finally happening, and we don't have to wait anymore and just sort of stop speculating.
So it sounds like they've done it. So as we've said before, whether we like it or not, the businessmen sat down, had a meeting, and they decided that this was enough. They're going to adopt Segwit, and then they also decided about a 2x hard fork. What's on the schedule for the 2x hard fork, Jim?
Well, so that is scheduled to happen roughly 3 months after actual Segwit activation. And remember, like BIP91, BIP148, they were all sort of mechanisms to force everyone to activate BIP141, which is Segwit. So Segwit lock-in actually doesn't happen until about August 10th, at least, like around there. Maybe it might be a little earlier, maybe even a couple days earlier because there's so much hashing power online. But that's when it locks in. One difficulty adjustment period, or 2016 blocks later, is when when Segwit will actually be active, and that's around August 23rd or so. 3 months after that is when we should expect a hard fork. And my calculation currently is around November 18th. That may need some revision to be earlier to something like November 15th or something. But I will note with prejudice that Matt Corallo and Mike Belshi had an exchange on Twitter that seemed to indicate that BTC1 may be amenable to delaying the hard fork a little bit, and maybe even to 2018 or something like that. So in that case, we might have peace for a little longer, or maybe there's another negotiation that needs to happen. I have no idea, but yeah, somebody's gonna need to force a fork, or I mean, we'll see what happens with BIP91. And see what signals people do in that like 336 epoch where everyone's supposed to prepare for, Segwit, mandatory Segwit signaling, and that will sort of give us a clue as to what's going on. But yeah, this week is very exciting, and we should see some. We should basically see everyone's cards at this point. Everyone's been sort of holding them close to their vest to some degree, and now we get to see them.
All right, finally some action for Bitcoin. So pretty much, let's see, looking at it, the hard fork. We were talking about this today on Twitter, and I said, is there any kind of mechanism we could add to Bitcoin to stop them from hard forking? And you said, no, it's impossible. They can always take the UTXOs. They can always run off and make their own Bitcoin. What about Bitcoin ABC? What is that all about?
Well, so as far as I know, and I may be wrong on this, Bitcoin ABC is the user-activated hard fork that Jihan's been talking about, and that's sort of only that only comes into play if BIP91 doesn't happen or doesn't close with 80% signaling. If BIP148, the user-activated soft fork starts, then this Bitcoin ABC would be sort of the miner's response. It's sort of a nuclear weapon that they're sort of holding back, I think. But that's not really a scenario.
They felt they had to rename, make a web page for, show us, put out on display, right? Because this isn't just the old UAHF or MAHF, as Tone was calling it. This is a Bitcoin ABC and Bitcoin Cash, right? They have a new name.
Yeah, I mean, this is from a game theory perspective. This is making the threat more and more credible, and that's, at least from the miner's perspective, that's what they're trying to do. I mean, that said, I don't think it's actually going to it's just sort of a weapon that they're not going to use, I don't think, unless something crazy happens, like a failed BIP91 activation or something like that, which at this point seems like a lower probability event. But yeah, I mean, you never know, and this is where sort of like the markets, I imagine, will respond very quickly. If it looks like BIP91 will fail, I imagine price will reflect that and things like that. So yeah, it's exciting. Maybe a little too exciting for me, but that's kind of what we're up against here.
Now, the default idea on the markets, not to go too much into charting or anything, but when Litecoin activated Segwit, the price of Litecoin went from $4 to $40. So the price of Bitcoin right now is $22.65. If we activate Segwit, which will happen, okay, well, lock in a few days, and then it'll be pretty much activated by August 1st to duck under the UASF, right? We're limboing the UASF.
Well, BIP91 will activate by August 1st. Actual Segwit, BIP141, won't activate until like August 23rd and won't lock in until August 10th. I mean, those are technicalities, and there are opportunities to sort of betray some of this all during that time. So there is some small risk of like some serious betrayal in there somewhere. So I wouldn't count on anything until like, you know, Segwit is actually active and there's been a Segwit transaction. You know, as they say, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush or whatever. We kind of got like 2 or 3 birds in the bush right now. We should just sort of like wait and see exactly what happens first, and then maybe at that point there would be more price action. But I'm certainly there's
everything's
enough to
going so
trade.
well now. Let's get into more of these failure solutions. You have here a failed BIP91 timeline. What would happen here, Jimmy?
Well, so every epoch, every 336 block period closes with less than 80% signaling. And this would only really happen if some signers of the New York agreement backed out. And obviously that's not what we expect, but it could happen. There's like right now, BIP Fury isn't signaling BIP91. Of course, you know, I mean, they have plenty of time to do that. Like as you can see in this timeline, looks like you know, like July 29th, you know, they could signal up to that or something like that. But you know, it would require somebody seriously betraying the trust of a lot of people. But that could happen, and if that happens,
okay, but well, slow down. Let's stack up the incentives. Would they get some kind of money if they betray them? Could they mine the network better? Why would they betray them?
Maybe they want to get the fork over with earlier or something, or they'd like to price in that, or they want a split of some kind. I mean, there are people like that out there. I'm not one of them, but there certainly are people that have in mind that a fork sooner rather than later is better for Bitcoin, and they may actually, and maybe one of these miners that controls enough hash power is one of them. I don't know, but
so if that happens and it's driven below 80% for one of these epochs, it basically
all of those epochs. It would have to be, yeah. Even if one epoch gets over 80%, that's enough to lock it in.
Oh, sure, but I mean, it's just like, okay, so they keep blocking it, so they get close to the end. Something goes wrong. Oh, part of our network went offline. We ran out of electricity. Oops. We blew up some of the network or something, and we just can't seem to get it. What would happen is there wouldn't be Segwit on the network, so then the UASF would kick in, and then there'd be a possibility of 2 chains. Right?
Yeah, and that gets way more complicated, because at that point it really depends on how much hash power BIP148 has. And if it's like in the single percentages, like, you know, 3, 4, 5%, I imagine they would hard fork to a proof of work just to be able to get throughput on their chain and things like that. So there's a lot. I mean, I did another article a while back on like UASF scenarios. A lot of that still applies if we get to that point. The hope for BIP91 is that it would front run this and sort of prevent it, and you know, sort of make peace that way. But yeah, I mean, all of those, everything is on the table.
There could be Segwit UASF miners sitting offline, waiting to join in. This is the current stats right now, right? Which one of these would be UASF?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
This one is, well, this one's BIP91. This one is Segwit, so that would be 141, right? Normal. Other, we don't know. BU would be 28. So
2.8.
As long as, well, if the UASF activates, this 17% here would not be enough, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that 17% would go with UASF necessarily. I mean, they could, obviously, and who knows? Like this is the crazy part about like sort of August 1st and UASF. Nobody really knows any of these stats, and you know, like people may have good guesses as to what cards people are holding, but until they actually show them, you don't really know. And this is why sort of like BIP91 is kind of refreshing, right? Because we finally get to see people's hands. And you know, you sort of have to declare with each block, and that's you know, like we'll see on August 1st if that scenario comes to pass. But I imagine there would be some serious panic if we keep not getting to 80%. Say around like July 26th or so, I can imagine a serious panic at that point.
Now, you also talk about a delayed timeline in your article.
Right.
What would the delayed timeline be like?
Yeah, so if the first or second epochs don't result in 80% signaling, but the third does, then everything else goes through pretty much as normal, because July 27th is when the new difficulty adjustment period begins, and that's sort of like a fixed date. And as long as you get 95% of those 2016 blocks, and it looks very likely, even if we're BIP91 activates July 28th, every block after that has to signal for Segwit. So, there's a very strong probability that everything else goes through as planned. And like August 1st, August 10th, August 23rd, all those dates, they'll stay exactly the same. So, I mean, it's not necessarily urgent that we get BIP91 locked in this epoch, is basically what I'm trying to say. It can happen in the next epoch or the epoch after that, as long as it just gets done before like July 28th or so.
All right, and just for reference, we're getting these stats from xbt.eu. If you guys are interested, and again, Jimmy's right, we don't know exactly what this means, and these could all change if there's offline miners or if people change their minds. Let's see, we're looking for some questions from the audience now. We're checking this out. Let's see, what do we got? Let's see, to protect, sorry, just a sec. Okay, to protect from the worst case scenario for hodlers, do we need to do anything other than move to a BIP148 supported wallet?
I mean, as long as you're not transacting, you don't need to do anything. Your private keys are your private keys. Neither fork is going to be able to take money from you unless something truly crazy happens. I mean, I guess that's a possibility, but that's like extremely low probability. And that chain, yeah. Anyway. Don't worry about it. As long as you have your own private keys, you're safe, and like just don't do any transactions. Now, if you have it on an exchange, I would start worrying. That would be the major liability that you could incur if BIP91 fails and we get to a UASF thing. If you have it on an exchange or some wallet online where you don't control your private keys, then it's possible that the exchange may decide, hey, you know what, we're only supporting one branch, and you don't have rights to any of the other branch, and that would suck because you would be losing money. It'd be like the Ethereum split where they only give you one side of the fork and you don't get any of the other side. And I think
I'm not sure that Coinbase ever delivered the Ethereum Classic to those people. They waited a long time, and I'm not sure it ever came in. There was a lot of talk. But.
Yeah, and Coinbase seems to be taking the same stance towards possible Bitcoin split. We're only going to support one coin, and we will just sort of, like not give you any money for that. So really the major risk is having money online where you don't control your private keys. Control your private keys. This is something that you should be doing anyway. Just good security practices. This is what Bitcoin is about. It's about being your own bank and being able to control your wealth. So if you don't have that, then like that would be the way to protect yourself.
And one of the best metaphors that I've heard for Bitcoin is that it's like a padlock that you come and put on the chain, and you have your padlock and you have the keys to your padlock, and you can always come back and unlock your padlock with the keys. And now we're talking about all these different chains. If there were multiple chains out there, your key would fit the same padlock on each one of these chains. So that's why you would have Bitcoin and Bitcoin Classic and Bitcoin 2 and Bitcoin 3 and whatever happens down the line. Your key would still fit. But that's, again, going back to this idea. Do you hold your keys? Does Coinbase hold your keys? Does blockchain.info hold your keys? It depends who's holding your keys.
Yeah, and that's a very good analogy. Like you have the key, and they'll replicate everything, including the padlock. So you get to unlock your UTXOs on whatever chain you have. So like as long as you control your private keys, you're protected. The only major risk is other people, which tends to be the case in Bitcoin.
All right. What if Bitcoin ABC had the longest chain? Is there a way that they could somehow win?
I mean, they would be winning their chain, but Bitcoin ABC, as far as I know, is a hard fork. So nobody else would, anyone that doesn't hard fork would find their blocks to be invalid. So sort of a non-starter. I don't know. I mean, the only way they could win is if all the hashing power went over to them, in which case the other fork dies, sort of a whimpering death or something like that. But just given the number of people that are for UASF, for example, I don't think that would happen. Even if it requires a proof of work change, the other fork will live.
All right, we've got another follow-up question on the ABC coin. Why is Jihan forking to ABC coin if everyone's intention is to activate Segwit before August 1st?
Well, like I said, I don't think that's his intention. It's only his intention if we get to a point where BIP91 never activates before August 1st and UASF starts. This would be his response to UASF. Bitcoin ABC would be the response to UASF. And I mean, from a game theory perspective, this is the credible threat that exists right there for everyone to see, so that that doesn't happen. And this is sort of the stick for everyone to signal BIP91, for example, instead of having two coins. Yeah, that is my guess. I could be wrong, but that's at least how I understand what Bitcoin ABC is.
All right, and I don't want to go too much into this. I probably need to make a separate video just discussing this, but okay, so here's what it is to hold your private keys. If your Bitcoins are in Coinbase, Coinbase holds your private keys. So when it comes time to choose which padlock they're going to unlock with your keys, they make the choice for you. To actually hold your private keys does take some work. You're going to have to set up a system, something like a Trezor, a Ledger, a Keep Ledger, a Keep Key, a hardware wallet, or a paper wallet, something you can print out. But you have to print it out from a secure website, from a secure computer, which pretty much means running Tails, which is a version of Linux that you can reboot to that won't save anything. And that's all very complicated. But the reality is that, yeah, you should probably buy one of those devices, try to put your Bitcoin on there, because then you will be the one who decides who uses your key on which chain. And if you want to wait until all the chains are gone, just use your key on the winning chain, that's fine. If you want to bet early by maybe selling some of your coins on the other chains, that's a way to bet on this, or maybe buying more. But again, this is all assuming that we have multiple chains, which isn't necessarily happening. But this is just about key management. And if you really want to be a Bitcoiner, you got to be your own bank, manage your own keys, get a safe deposit box, enjoy the irony of going back to the bank to store your digital money in their fancy safe boxes, because they're great at safe boxes. That's one of the things they do well. Even that they screw it up sometimes. But let's go back, try to find some more questions. Okay, scrolled really fast. Let's see. Thomas, are you Satoshi? Technically, I am. I have provided more proof than Craig Wright. If you go back on Twitter, I've signed a message saying that I am Satoshi. My friend JJ helped me out with it. But he's busy writing BTC1 now or something like that. Let's see. Question. How did this not get figured out at Consensus 2017? It's stupid to risk billions of dollars in market share on uncertainty like this. This seems like a pretty responsible question. Jimmy, what you got?
So how did what not get figured out? I'm not
well,
sure.
I think they want scaling. In some ways it did. The New York agreement took place at Consensus, although really it seems like it was much more of a formality and more of a signing. The real question maybe, why didn't it get solved at the Scaling Bitcoin conferences? I'm not sure. The conferences are, sometimes the conference is an academic thing. Sometimes the conference is more like a show that you go to and you see some speakers. I don't know what kind of conferences these were. Scaling Bitcoin, like they didn't have any really like binding agreements. It wasn't an agreement-based conference. consensus was more of a show for Bitcoin. It's more of an advertisement than an academic thing. Not to be critical, advertisements are important. But Jimmy, what do you think? Why wasn't it solved at one of these conferences or meetups or something?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, but I will credit BIP 148 for sort of driving a deadline for something like this, because that was sort of like, we will launch a nuclear weapon on August 1st, and people sort of responded to that and said, hey, we'll front run that and make sure that the nuclear weapon doesn't launch. That seems to be what happened. And you know, with any negotiation,
the problem is they attach their own nuclear weapon to the end of their agreement. Darn it! I'm getting frustrated here. It's
yeah.
Part of it. I love what they did on the first half. It's like, oh, we're going to be benevolent and save Bitcoin from. We just don't know what would happen with the UASF. It's good. It's bad. It's an unchosen thing, and it's also the idea that someone could throw this in again. Maybe a government actor, maybe another coder that doesn't like Bitcoin. We could have another one of these. Then the other part is, yeah, that they've completely taken control of development, and they're driving us into a 2x hard fork, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I mean, like, why wasn't this done before? Probably because it requires something like hard fork, right? Like, and that's largely why it hasn't happened. And now we're sort of headed towards it. I mean,
I'm afraid that the more apt question might be, will this happen the next time? Will all Bitcoin development be top down from a boardroom, which could be good because it looks smooth and we don't have all these ups and downs and these swings, but it could be bad because we don't know what that boardroom is going to describe or decide on scientifically, right?
Yeah, this is yeah, going to set all sorts of precedents, and hard to know what will happen in the future, but you know, what happens now will definitely affect it. I don't necessarily know that what's happened here with all this is a good thing. And you know, like I've said it before, you know, scarier thing might not be failure, it might be success. And you know, whatever success that we got here, it sets precedents for the future. So you know, like, take everything sort of with a grain of salt here. It's possible that, you know, something bad may come out of this too. So we don't know, right? Like, the markets will react and will sort of tell us more information about whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. But I will say that, you know, nothing's ever always good, right? Like, there's always sort of downsides to everything, and this probably indicates why it took so long to do it. Is there's some significant downsides of a possible hard fork that may happen in 3 months. So, you know, I mean, you got to temper the enthusiasm of getting Segwit and possible scaling and all this other stuff with the possibility that we still have of 2 coins. So, yeah.
All right, we have a question about tax record-keeping software. What do we recommend? I think that Coinbase will actually give you a readout now of what you're supposed to pay on your gains and losses, keeping in mind that Coinbase assumes if you transfer it off, you've sold it. If you transfer it in, you've bought it. They mark the price at that point for tax purposes. I've also heard of LibraTax. I think they changed the name, but if you Google LibraTax, it should come up. And yes, we definitely agree. Everyone should pay their capital gains tax. You should pay whatever the IRS wants on your Bitcoin. Vital. There's a comment from Creature Mystery. He says, he feels like the Joker has somehow got in charge of everything. It is a little interesting feeling, because we had a kind of an academic project. They would talk about the code on their mailing list. They would have little debates, and then the code would decide. And now we've gotten to the point where the debate went on too long. The scaling debate went on for 2 years. We talked Segwit until we're blue in the face. And then it kind of looks like the adults come in and took the project away from the developers, who may have debated forever, right? And this is a political thing, and you can debate so long, and at a certain point you have to make the weapon or whatever it's going to be. But Jimmy, what do you think? Have the adults come in, or should we have stayed a science project? Are we still a science project?
Yeah, I have no idea what should have happened, and I try not to moralize in all of my articles. I just sort of try to report what the hell happened, or what is going to happen, or what may happen. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I don't think Bitcoin particularly cares what I think or what any particular person thinks. It just does what the market wants. And right now, the market seems to want, sort of, Segwit, obviously, and some, possible hard fork drama down the line. And now some people are going to complain about that and say this is bad, this is good, whatever. But I mean, I sort of look at Bitcoin from a detached perspective and say, it just is. It's kind of like your children or something. They just are. I mean, you try to guide them and help them, but at the core, they are who they are. And if you try to change them too much or nag them too much or something, they grow up with problems. So that's just sort of my perspective on it.
And I think that's a good note to end on. We had about 314 live viewers. Thanks to everyone for giving us a thumbs up and a share. That helps people discover the shows. And as you can see from the morning shows, we've been doing daily videos here on the World Crypto Network. We're trying to spread out and get more viewers. So please subscribe to the World Crypto Network. If you'd like to join the Mad Bitcoins Patreon, we are now 39 strong, raising more than $216 a month towards our goal of 2,000, getting closer and closer. If you'd like to donate some Bitcoins, we've got the MAD QR code right here. But we're running out of time. Jimmy, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, I mean, this is Bitcoin. This is what you sort of signed up for, whether you knew it or not. There's going to be a lot of drama. I've always said there's more drama to come. Everything seems to change every day. So, don't worry too much. Keep a calm head and just enjoy the ride.
All right, and we'll see you tomorrow morning with Today in Bitcoin. And just a poem going out. Jimmy kept saying epoch so many times, so you have no choice. You get this. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of belief. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil, in the superlative degree of comparison only.